Yo, real talk. Some kids don't grow up feeling invisible. They grow up feeling like they're constantly being graded. Not in school, but in life. Measured against everyone. And that messes you up in ways nobody talks about. Let me break it down. Let me hit you with something that basically nobody brings up. Honestly, some kids don't grow up feeling unseen or whatever. Nah, they grow up feeling measured. Like constantly being sized up against a sibling, measured against a cousin, stacked up against the neighbor's kid, compared to some imaginary version of themselves that never even existed but was low-key described to them all the time. When adulthood kicks in, the kid who is always being compared doesn't just bounce back and leave that experience in the rear view. They carry it quietly into their relationships, their job, their goals, and even when they're trying to chill, because comparison didn't just teach them how to perform and show out. It literally taught them how to relate to other people. In friendships, they might feel this unspoken pressure to stay useful, you feel me? They listen super deeply. They show up consistently. No cap, they give way more than they ever ask for. But underneath all that generosity is this familiar fear, this anxiety that's always there. Like, if I stop adding value, will I still matter? Will people still rock with me? They often become the reliable one, the strong one, the one who doesn't need much from anybody. And people admire this. For real. But here's the thing. Admiration ain't the same as being truly known. There's a difference between being respected and being understood. In romantic relationships, comparison shows up in mad subtle ways. They might struggle to believe they're chosen for who they actually are, rather than what they bring to the table. Love feels conditional even when it's not. They're out here reading between lines that don't even exist. They're stressing about being replaced, even without any evidence whatsoever. They're measuring themselves against past partners, imagined rivals, these idealized standards that nobody could ever reach. This creates this constant background tension, not because their partner is shady or untrustworthy, but because their nervous system learned way back that connection can get snatched away at any moment. So the heart stays on high alert, always watching, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. At work, the pattern becomes even more intense, even more pronounced. They might overwork, grinding like crazy, not because they're passionate about it, but because they're scared. Scared of being average, scared of getting outpaced, scared of becoming invisible in the workplace. Achievements bring momentary relief, not actual satisfaction. And here's the kicker. Relief is not fulfillment, bro. It's just the absence of threat. It's just your brain saying, okay, you're safe for now. They struggle hard to celebrate progress. The mind immediately jumps to, all right, what's next? What do I gotta do now? Rest feels straight up unsafe because comparison never rests. Someone else is always moving, always grinding, always hustling. And if they stop, even for a second, they imagine falling behind, getting left in the dust. This leads to a very specific kind of exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, but existential exhaustion. The feeling of constantly running without knowing where the finish line even is. Like you're on a treadmill that keeps speeding up and you can't get off. And here's the wild paradox, the crazy part. Many people who grew up being compared are highly capable, super talented. They're insightful, emotionally aware, adaptable as hell. But these strengths were forged under pressure, which means they come with a serious cost, a price tag. They may struggle with decision-making because choosing feels risky as hell. What if it's the wrong choice? What if someone else chooses better? What if this decision makes me look less impressive, less put together? So they delay. They overthink everything. They seek reassurance from everyone around them. They learned early on that outcomes determine worth, so every single decision feels like a test they could fail. There's also this interesting, complex relationship with failure. Some become deeply afraid of it, terrified. Others almost expect it, like it's inevitable. They may sabotage opportunities right before success hits, not consciously or intentionally, but emotionally, because success creates exposure, visibility, and exposure feels dangerous to someone who has constantly evaluated their whole life. Failing early feels safer than being judged later, you know? So they might pull back right at the moment things begin to go well, right when they're about to win, and then blame themselves for it afterward. But this isn't self-destruction. Not really. It's self-protection that never got the software update it needed. Another quiet, sneaky effect of constant comparison is the loss of internal motivation, intrinsic drive. When a kid grows up focused on outperforming others, they lose touch with what they actually desire for themselves. They become skilled at doing what gets rewarded, what gets praised, but not at identifying what they genuinely enjoy, what makes them happy. So as adults, they may feel directionless, lost. They may succeed in a path they didn't even choose for themselves. They may look accomplished from the outside, like they got it all together, and still feel empty inside, because fulfillment requires alignment, being in sync, and alignment requires self-connection, which comparison disrupts and destroys. The healing process, the recovery journey, begins not with confidence, but with curiosity, real curiosity about your own internal experience, your inner world. What do I actually like? What feels meaningful to me? Personally, what values feel steady, solid, even without applause, even without validation? These questions can feel uncomfortable as hell at first, because for someone raised on comparison, silence feels unfamiliar, weird. There's no scoreboard, no immediate feedback, no likes or comments. Just presence. But presence is where identity lives, where you actually find yourself. Another crucial step, mad important, is learning to recognize the old measuring reflex, that automatic response, that moment when you enter a room and immediately scan the environment. Who's doing better than me? Who's more confident? Who has more status, more clout? This reflex isn't a flaw in your character. It's a learned pattern, conditioning, and patterns can be observed without being obeyed, without controlling you. You can notice the comparison happening without following through with it. You can say to yourself, this is an old habit, an outdated program, and gently return to yourself. Come back to center. Comparison narrows attention, makes everything tunnel vision. Self-awareness expands it, opens it up. The body also plays a major role in healing, in recovery, because comparison lives not just in your thoughts, but in physical tension. The shoulders that stay raised up, the jaw that stays tight and clenched, the breath that stays shallow and quick. These are signs of vigilance, of being on guard 24/7. Learning to relax, to let go, is not laziness or being weak. It's relearning what safety actually feels like. This is why many people who grew up being compared feel uncomfortable, anxious. When things are calm, calm feels unfamiliar, strange. Chaos feels normal, feels like home. But calm is where repair happens, where healing takes place. Another important piece of the puzzle is redefining success, not as superiority over others, not as being number one, but as alignment with yourself. Success becomes doing work that feels meaningful, even if nobody notices, even if you don't get recognition. Success becomes relationships that feel mutual, balanced, not performative or transactional. Success becomes rest without guilt, chilling without feeling like you should be grinding. This redefinition is not easy, not simple, because it goes against all the conditioning, everything you learned. But it's necessary. It's essential for healing. There's also grief that emerges during the healing process. Grief for the version of you that never got to just be, to just exist. The child who had to grow up way too fast, too soon. The child who learned to earn love instead of just receive it freely. This grief may come in waves, hitting you randomly. It may feel heavy as hell, but it's part of integration, part of becoming whole. You're not becoming weaker by feeling this grief. You're becoming whole, complete. One of the most powerful moments in healing is when you stop asking, "Am I better than them?" and start asking, "Am I being honest with myself? Am I being real?" Because honesty builds self-trust, and self-trust is the complete opposite of comparison. When you trust yourself, you don't need constant external validation from everyone around you. You listen inward. You respond instead of react on autopilot. You choose based on your values, not on fear. Relationships also shift, transform. You begin to allow yourself to be seen without performing, without putting on a show. You ask for help without feeling lesser than, without shame. You set boundaries without explaining your worth, without justifying your existence. This may feel uncomfortable at first, awkward even, because you're stepping out of a familiar role, a character you've played. But over time, it feels relieving, freeing, because you're no longer acting. You're actually participating in your own life. It's also important, super important, to address self-compassion. Many people who grew up being compared become harsh with themselves, brutal. They speak internally in ways they would never ever speak to someone they love. This voice is often inherited, not chosen. It was downloaded into you. Learning to soften that voice is not indulgent or being soft. It's corrective. It's fixing what was broken. You can challenge that voice not with toxic positivity, but with reality, with facts. You can say, "I'm allowed to exist without being exceptional. I'm allowed to be average sometimes. I'm allowed to just be human." This sentence can feel radical, revolutionary even, but it's true. It's real. Human worth is not earned through accomplishments. It's inherent. It's built in from day one. The final shift happens when you realize something quietly powerful, something that changes everything. Comparison stole time from you. Time you could have spent exploring yourself, resting properly, connecting genuinely with people. Healing is not about becoming someone completely new, some different person. It's about reclaiming that time internally, getting it back, letting yourself move at your own pace, your own speed, letting your life unfold without constant measurement, without the scoreboard running in your head. The child who was always compared grew up learning how to survive evaluation, survive judgment. The adult they become can learn how to live without it. Not perfectly, not all at once overnight, but gradually, gently, with awareness and intention. And one day, without noticing exactly when it happened, without marking it on the calendar, the inner question changes completely. It's no longer, "Am I enough compared to others? How do I stack up?" It becomes, "Am I being true to myself today? Am I being authentic?" And that question, unlike comparison, has no enemy to fight, no competition, only direction, only a path forward. Why can't you be more like them? Look at how well they behave. They're your age and already doing so much better than you. At first it sounds harmless, right? Just words, just motivation, just trying to push you to be better. But the child hears something else entirely, something completely different. They don't hear encouragement or support. They hear replacement, They hear, "You're not good enough as you are." They learn very early, way too early, that love is not stable, not guaranteed. It shifts, it compares, it ranks you, and slowly, quietly, like water eroding stone, something inside them starts to bend, starts to break. The child who has always compared doesn't grow up asking, "Who am I? What makes me unique?" They grow up asking, "Am I enough yet? Have I done enough to be loved?" Psychology tells us, shows us clearly, that identity is not formed in isolation, in a vacuum. It's formed in reflection, in how others see us. A child learns who they are by seeing how they are responded to, how people react to them. When those responses are constantly filtered through comparison, measured against others, the child doesn't develop a solid sense of self, a stable identity. They develop a sense of position instead. First place, second place, last place. They begin to understand themselves not as a person with inherent worth, but as a score on a leaderboard. And here's where the damage becomes invisible, hidden, because that child may still function normally. They may still succeed in school. They may still smile and seem fine. They may even outperform others later in life, become successful. But internally, they are never standing still, never at peace. They are always racing someone who isn't even there, chasing ghosts. When a child is repeatedly compared, over and over, their nervous system learns a specific lesson, internalizes a rule. Safety comes from outperforming others. Approval is conditional, not guaranteed. Affection is earned through achievement. Rest is dangerous because you might fall behind. This is not a conscious belief, not something they think about. It becomes a background rule, operating system code. And background rules are the hardest to unlearn, the most difficult to reprogram. Research in developmental psychology shows us that children internalize parental evaluations as part of their inner voice, their self-talk. So when comparison becomes frequent, constant, the child doesn't just hear it externally from parents. They absorb it. They download it. Over time, that voice moves inside, becomes part of them. Even when no one is watching, when they're completely alone, the comparison continues. They sit in a room by themselves and still feel watched, observed. They achieve something cool and immediately ask, "Is this better than what they did? Does this measure up?" They fail at something and feel not just disappointment, but shame, deep shame. Because failure doesn't mean I made a mistake anymore. It means I fell behind. I lost the race. One of the most misunderstood effects of constant comparison is perfectionism. People assume perfectionism comes from having high standards, from wanting excellence. In reality, it often comes from fear, deep, primal fear. The fear of being measured and found lacking, found wanting. The child learns early that mistakes are not neutral events. They are evidence. Evidence that someone else is winning. Evidence that love might move away from them, shift to someone better. So they try to eliminate mistakes, not because they genuinely love excellence, but because they fear replacement, fear being swapped out. And yet, no matter how much they improve, how much they level up, the finish line keeps moving further away. Because comparison never ends, never stops. There is always someone smarter, faster, calmer, more accomplished, more successful. So the child grows into an adult who does not know how to arrive, how to feel satisfied. They achieve something meaningful, something big, and feel nothing, feel empty, because relief is temporary and comparison is permanent. The relief fades, but the comparison stays. Another outcome is something quieter but just as painful, just as damaging. Emotional shrinking. Some children, when constantly compared, don't try to win the competition. They withdraw instead. They decide, often unconsciously without realizing it, that competing is too costly, too expensive emotionally. That trying invites scrutiny. That standing out increases the chance of being judged harshly. So they become agreeable, low maintenance, easy to overlook, invisible. They don't ask for much. They don't expect much from anyone. And from the outside, they may look calm, peaceful, unbothered. Inside, they feel invisible, erased. Psychologists sometimes describe this as learned minimization. The child learns that being less noticeable, less visible, reduces emotional risk. If I don't try, I can't lose. If I don't shine, I can't be compared. If I stay small, I stay safe. But this strategy, this coping mechanism, comes at a serious price, because later in life, when opportunity appears, knocks on the door, their body hesitates automatically, not because they lack ability or talent, but because attention feels unsafe, dangerous. They associate being seen with being evaluated, and evaluation feels like danger, like a threat. There's also the child who becomes hyper-aware, super observant. They learn to read the room before the room even speaks. Before words are said, they notice micro-expressions, tiny tone changes, pauses in conversation. They track how praise is distributed, who gets celebrated, who gets corrected or criticized. This child grows into an adult with intense emotional intelligence, serious people reading skills. But it's not peaceful intelligence. It's survival intelligence. They're always scanning the environment, always adjusting themselves, always calibrating to remain acceptable, to stay in good standing. They can sense disappointment before it's spoken out loud. And because of that ability, they often carry responsibility that was never actually theirs to carry. They try to manage other people's reactions, control outcomes. They anticipate needs before they're expressed. They preempt criticism before it arrives. And over time, slowly but surely, they lose touch with what they actually want, what they desire, because they were trained from childhood to prioritize what would keep them in good standing, what would keep them safe. One of the most painful consequences, the deepest wounds from growing up compared, is the relationship with self-worth. Self-worth becomes externalized, placed outside of yourself. It lives in grades, in feedback, in numbers, in validation from others. The person may say they believe in themselves, they might claim confidence, but emotionally they don't trust that belief unless it's confirmed by someone else. Validated externally, silence feels like rejection. Neutral feedback feels negative, feels like criticism. Praise feels temporary, fleeting, because comparison taught them early that value can be withdrawn at any moment, taken away. This is why many adults who were constantly compared as kids struggle hard with rest, with chilling. Rest feels undeserved, like they haven't earned it. If they're not improving, grinding, they feel anxious. If they're not being productive, they feel behind, like they're losing. Their body does not recognize stillness as safety. It recognizes movement as protection, hustle as survival. There's also grief in this experience, deep grief. Grief for the childhood that could have been, should have been. A childhood where curiosity was enough, where just being interested in something mattered, where effort mattered more than outcome, more than results, where being yourself was not a competition, not a performance. But comparison interrupts that natural development. It turns growth into performance art. Instead of asking, what am I drawn to? What interests me? The child asks, what will make me acceptable? What will make them approve of me? Instead of exploring their identity, discovering themselves, they chase approval. And approval is a moving target, always shifting, never stable. Neurologically, this matters big time. When children feel accepted for who they are, unconditionally, their nervous system develops resilience, develops strength. When they feel accepted only when they outperform, only when they win, their nervous system develops vigilance instead, develops anxiety. They become alert, on edge, even in safe environments. This is why adults who were compared as children often overthink conversations, replay them endlessly. They replay interactions in their head. They search for signs they did something wrong, said something off. They learned early on that small differences could change how they were treated, could shift love. So nothing feels small anymore. Everything feels loaded, weighted, significant. Comparison also distorts sibling relationships, damages them. Instead of connection and closeness, there's quiet competition. Instead of safety and trust, there's tension. Even in adulthood, decades later, this can linger like a ghost. They may love their sibling genuinely, but a part of them still measures distance, still keeps score. Who's doing better? Who's more successful? Who's closer to parental approval? And this comparison is rarely conscious, rarely intentional. It operates like background noise, always there, always influencing, always affecting decisions. It's important to say this clearly, to state this plainly. Most caregivers who compare children do not intend harm. They're not trying to damage their kids. Often they're repeating what they experienced growing up, passing down generational patterns, or they're trying to motivate, trying to push, or they're responding to their own fears and insecurities. But impact matters way more than intent, and the impact of comparison is fragmentation, is splitting. The child learns to split themselves. There's the version of them that's acceptable, that gets approval, and there's the version that's hidden, kept secret. Over time, this creates serious internal conflict. They feel like they're never fully themselves anywhere, with anyone. They adapt to every environment, which sounds like a strength, sounds like flexibility, until they realize they don't actually know who they are. When no one is watching, when they're alone with themselves. As adults, many of these individuals find themselves exhausted without knowing exactly why, can't pinpoint the source. They're tired of maintaining an internal scoreboard that never shuts off. They're tired of proving something that was never clearly defined, never spelled out. They're tired of chasing a feeling of enoughness that never arrives, never comes. Healing begins with a simple but uncomfortable realization, a truth that hurts. You are not behind. You were never lacking. You were responding intelligently to an environment that taught you to measure yourself instead of understand yourself. The child who was always compared learned strategies, developed coping mechanisms that helped them survive emotionally. Those strategies were intelligent, were adaptive, but they may no longer be necessary. They may no longer serve you. Learning to separate self-worth from comparison is not an overnight process. It's not a quick fix. It involves noticing when the old voice appears, when it pops up, the voice that asks automatically, how do I rank? Where do I stand? Instead of, how do I feel? What do I need? It involves practicing being internally referenced, checking in with yourself, checking in with your values instead of external outcomes, instead of what others think. And most importantly, it involves grief. Real, deep grief. Grief for the validation you needed but did not receive unconditionally. Grief for the acceptance that should have been automatic. That grief is not weakness. It's not being dramatic. It's honesty. And honesty is the beginning of integration, of becoming whole. Because the moment you stop comparing yourself to others, something strange happens. something shifts. You start to feel your own weight again, your own presence, not heavy, real, solid, grounded. And that, right there, is where the story begins to change, where you begin to change, where healing actually starts.